Okay, everybody. If we can settle down just a little bit. Gil, will you open up the meeting again for us?
Good morning. I trust everyone had a wonderful night. I hope James got some crawfish beignets.
They were delicious.
I'm glad you liked them. Looking forward to a productive day, much like yesterday. Microphones should be a little bit more convenient for you all today. Thank you for seeing us through a little bit of difficulty yesterday, but I expect today to run smoothly and without issue along there. But other than that, James, are we ready to jump into the agenda?
Absolutely we are.
Great.
So just to go over a few meeting rules first, I just want to make sure that we cover everything. Again, I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until the end of presentations. Typically, we've been asking folks to do 2 questions at a time, and then we'll move on and come back around if we have time at the end of the schedule allotment. I think that's been working pretty well, so we're going to do that again. If you do have a question, I'm going to ask that you stand your name tense up so that we can call on you. Please help us stay on topic. Let's not go too far afield with our questions. Let's stick with what we're talking about in that moment. Please check your side conversations. You'll notice there's a lot more microphones around the table today, and they're on, so we don't have to fumble with buttons again. Thank goodness. But that does mean that you're going to need to monitor yourselves and make sure that you're not talking too bad about Gil in the interims.
I expect it.
Please do ask questions, though. So at the end of the presentation, make sure that you've taken notes, that you've written down what you want to ask the presenters. Get clarification. If you're not sure about something, please let them know. If you want to know more, please ask. Microphones, again, so you notice there's no switch. We do have more of them. I am going to ask you to speak closely and clearly into the microphones. Close is not beside you. Close is not far away. Close is right here in front of you, and that's where you're going to need your microphone to be. If you turn your head, the microphone needs to travel with you. At no point will this get you anything, okay? Make sure it stays in front of you. And then please put your phones on silent. For the agenda today, it's going to be a great one. I know that we're going to open up with Angela Holmes and Chris Bergen. Or Bergren. I tripped over your name twice now, Chris. I'm sorry. After that, we're going to go into common infrastructure from Dave Bender. We'll get a budget update from John Lopez. And sometime in between there, I'm sure that we'll take a short little break in case anybody needs to stretch their legs. After the budget update, we'll go into lunch. When we get back at 1:15, we'll have a presentation on the liquid waste system plan, latest revision. Sonny Blanco will give that. And then Jeff Bentley and Penn Mason will talk about the Ticker 1 demonstration data. I know that there's been some questions. I know that there was actually a lot of questions from Hanford about Ticker on the tour and at the chairs meeting. So, Gil, you need to ask all of Shelley's questions for her here. No? Okay. After that, we'll take public comments, and then we'll move into voting for the day, and then we'll be done. Any questions about the agenda rules or the agenda itself? All right. Angela, if you and Chris can come up, and let's get started.
Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
My name is Angela Holmes. I am the Deputy Assistant Manager for Infrastructure and Environmental Stewardship. And with me this morning is Chris Bergren. Okay.
Good morning.
So Chris and I have worked together for about 20 years, I think. And just so you know, we are almost twins this morning. We dress alike. That helps us to promote D&D at the site. And Chris is the manager for environmental compliance and area completion projects, which includes all of our environmental, the wastewater, all of the water projects, and D&D. So we are here this morning to present to you our D&D. This is a list of the acronyms that's in your presentations. The purpose today is to provide an overview of the D&D process, that's deactivation and decommissioning at Savannah Riverside, progress over the last 20 years, decommissioning end states, a discussion on what those are, and the status of the program to date. The D&D framework, of course, being with the federal government, we have orders and guides that tell us how we are to do things. The predominant order is 430.1c, which is real property asset management. And that is from the beginning of a project to construction through D&D. So it takes the whole life of the project. The orders that are underneath are parts of that, the guides that are underneath the order. It goes from transition through D&D and then surveillance and maintenance. From that order, Savannah River Site developed the Facility Disposition Manual 1C. Now, deactivation, and we'll discuss it on a later slide, but it's the stable condition protective of the environment. Once the facility enters into deactivation, there's a lot of work that goes on there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Decommissioning. For Savannah River, we have tailored it to 3 different models. A simple model, and that'll be for just regular facilities that have not done any RAD processing. Integrated sampling model is a little bit more in depth. It's where we may have processes that have gone on. We may have underground sumps, process sewer lines that need to be remediated. And then the circle model is the ECA. That's the Engineering Evaluation and Cost Analysis model. That will be for the large hardened facilities, such as the reactors that we have decommissioned, certainly for the canyons that will be coming up and others on the site. The D&D framework, wanted to just show you this. Operations is what folks are doing, processing. Once operations are decided to shut down, we'll go into deactivation. From operations to deactivation, this is when we need the same people who are operating to go through that process. That is when we will remove materials, remove chemicals from the facility, and hopefully bring down the safety status of that facility. Then we'll move into, you'll see deactivation again. This is when we will take a facility to cold and dark. That means we will disconnect all power from the facility, make sure it is ready for people to go in and start taking down walls and all of that. So this deactivation here, certainly we need the operators, the maintenance mechanics, and all people to remain at the facility. And when they move to this portion of deactivation, it is removing wall panels, it's removing other hazards within the facility that does not include material and other safety significant activities. We'll move into decommissioning. And decommissioning, the end states that we do at Savannah River will be demolition or in situ. Demolition is usually to slab for the more sturdy facilities that will have like processed sewer lines underneath the slab. We'll leave those to be more protective. And in situ is what we did for P and R reactors, when we will leave the facility standing because it is very protective. And I'm sure that is something that we discuss with EPA and DHEC, the end states for all of the facilities, before we make that decision. So we have that discussion. And we use science to determine in situ versus taking it down to slab. And when I say that, it's what is the residual contaminants that may be left in the facility, the equipment that may be left in a facility. All of that has to be discussed and determined how we will go about in situ decommissioning. Will we grout the facility? Will we take down like the second floor, leave the first floor? Everything goes into that, including the wall thickness, the slab thickness, what we are leaving beneath the slab. So all of that goes into the consideration for in situ decommissioning. And the protectiveness, and we have Savannah River National Lab do calculations for us to do a grout mixture, and they'll also do calculations on how long this remedy will be protective. Long-term stewardship, post-decommissioning, monitoring has to continue for some facilities. For instance, at P and R Reactor, we have completed in situ decommissioning for those facilities. However, we will monitor and turn, after EM completes in 2065, we will turn those sites over to legacy management that will continue to monitor groundwater and if there are any insults to the environment from what we left. This continuum, surveillance and maintenance, just want you guys to see this, from operations all the way through long-term stewardship, there are costs for surveillance and maintenance that continue. That cost should go down as we approach the decommissioning and certainly in long-term stewardship. Hopefully, when we finish with decommissioning, that surveillance and maintenance number will be such that somebody rides by maybe once a year to make sure that if the structure is still there, it's still standing and still protective. Mentioned the decommissioning end states already, demolish, and those are for office buildings, warehouses, non-hardened structures. The contaminants are removed and we demolish to grade. We've had several of those facilities that have been decommissioned at the site, and we have several more to go. We have in our portfolio over 1,100 facilities, and we've decommissioned 282 to date. In situ decommissioning, an example is P Reactor. Hardened concrete structures will have contaminants that remain, and they will require long-term monitoring, surveillance and maintenance until we turn it over to legacy management. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris to show you some of the pictures of our demolition to grade, some of our other facilities that have been decommissioning, including the P Reactor, and including my favorite, the K Area Cooling Tower.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the past decommissioning efforts on the site. What you see here, I'll try to get my laser right. This is a facility that's inside the footprint of the Tritium complex. It's an NNSA area, if you will. And they had a warehouse that they wanted to abandon in order to free up some additional footprint for other missions out there. So last year we came in, we brought a contractor to come in. Who can guess what the biggest hazard would be associated with a warehouse like this? Asbestos. We had a lot of asbestos to deal with, and that was part of the first phase that we went in with from a deactivation perspective, was safely remove the asbestos by asbestos competent workers. Once the asbestos was removed, then a contractor brought in a set of shears, and within just a couple of days, the building was gone. It was a clean building, so all of the structure could go over to the Three Rivers landfill. And then this is what it looks like right now. So it's now an open area for other missions to take place over in the Tritium facilities. I've got a couple sets of pictures I want to do before and after, just to kind of give you an idea of the landscape changes that occur. The first one up on the upper left is an A area facility. It was just an administrative facility there. And then over on the right-hand side on the upper part was, oops, sorry, how do I do that? was the after. This is known as the Heavy Water Components Test Reactor, and I'm going to talk about that. Got a little bit of a video as we move on, but this was kind of a different structure for the site. It was actually built kind of like a commercial nuclear facility would look. It had a containment dome, had a reactor vessel, it had 2 steam generators included within it. And I'll walk you through this more specifically what we did from a D&D perspective there. But this is what it looks like right now. What's kind of interesting about this is this test reactor, if you've been out to the site, sat right in B area. It was wedged between the Sanitary offices and then the DOE and SRS office complex. So if you've been out there, you had seen the dome that was over the years had rusted and was rather unsightly. Again, just some other facilities here, just to give you a perspective. We've dealt from everything from this facility, now it's a parking lot, things that look like trailers or trailer complexes, just very, very easy buildings to go and take down. Now, typically what we do is when an operations is completed, and as Angela mentioned, it moves into the next phase of deactivation. We don't necessarily jump right into decommissioning, and because sometimes some of these office buildings and things like that may be repurposed. And so there usually is a lag between when the initial deactivation has occurred and decommissioning as well. So that's why it does take time to get to the point of determining, yes, there is no future potential end state or end use for a facility. Again, just a couple more pictures. For those of you that may have been on site, back when D area was in operation, this was the distillation towers back there behind the powerhouse. I don't know if anybody remembers that or not. This is what it looks like today. So those were facilities that we took to slab, took to grade. Now I want to talk a little bit about in situ decommissioning, and P reactor is a pretty good example of an in situ closure. So P reactor had, the floor matting was about 10-foot thick concrete enforced with rebar. The walls were 5 to 7 feet thick, concrete reinforced, blast-proof facility. This is the reactor itself. This was the assembly area where the fuel rods and assemblies came in. This was where the reactor vessel was, and disassembly basin sat over here. This is where the fuel rods and elements, after they had gone through the reactor, would sit and cool for a period of time and then were shipped off to the reactors. And then below the structure is where all of the operating components are. It goes down about 60 feet below grade. Now, unlike a commercial reactor, P reactor was not designed to be able to, one of these days I'll get that right, sorry, was not designed to accommodate the reactor vessel to come out. It was designed such that the reactor vessel was put in place and basically the structure was built around it. And that led to a lot of questions about how do you safely remove a reactor vessel. Commercial industry, you can. In this case, we couldn't. So we left the reactor vessel in place. We grouted the vessel. We grouted everything below grade. We also went in and made enhancements to the roof structure such that over time, what we wanted to make sure is that we didn't get vegetation to grow on the roof, and that we made the structure last as long as possible because there were radionuclides entrained in the steel that would take time to decay. And that's really what you want to do with an in situ closure, is give your contaminants time to decay off. So this is what it looks like now. Let's see if I can, there's my laser. So this is what it looks like before, and this is what it looked like after. So we removed the stack, we removed a number of the things that were on top of the roof. and then we enhanced the roof structure itself to make it last. As Angela mentioned, we also do surveillance and maintenance. For this structure every year, it's important for us to get out there and take a look at what's growing on the roof to make sure we understand that there's no water sitting or vegetation growing. It originally started out where Sanitary would go up every year in a helicopter and take a look, take pictures, and see if there was vegetation growing on the roof. And then we come out with crews and they come out with big spray cannons and spray the vegetation. Well, as technology evolved, now we're using drones for that purposes, and we linked up with the National Lab, and over the last 2 years, we've kind of been improving the process now where we have a drone that goes around all sides and to the roof of the reactor looking for any abnormalities, any cracks, any fissures, anything that would compromise the integrity of the roof. Then we decided to equip those drones with saddles that are capable of spraying herbicides. So they fly right up on those areas where there might be vegetation growing and do the application, which is great because then you're not wasting all those chemicals, you're not having to put people in risk, putting them up in JLG lifts and things like that. So kind of a neat way of, bringing technology to the table. K Cooling Tower. K Cooling Tower was built to support reactor restart. The K reactor did not go operational, so there was not a need for the cooling tower. And during Recovery Act, we did demolition of the cooling tower. We have a video here. To just push this and let it run. Okay. So this is K Cooling Tower. And we just have a short video on this. There were some very high level climbs where the crews went up and they drilled holes into the structure and they actually placed explosive charges in. And this was the end result. Pretty impressive sight to watch that come down. We segregated the concrete from the rebar. The rebar was sent to salvage for recycling, and the concrete went to the on-site C&D land disposal facility. And then the area was recontoured to be able to accommodate for rainwater purposes. So this is the next one I want to talk about. This was Hector. So Hector, again, sat in the middle of B area. It was built like a reactor. 2 steam generators. It had a reactor vessel. It operated for 2 years. Did not produce any electricity, but it did produce steam, and that steam was vented off to the atmosphere. And so we took a look at closure of it, and because it did have the capability of going in and safely removing the vessel and the steam generator, we did cut a hole around the dome. We removed the dome, and there is a video on this, and it'll show the dome removal. Very significant weight associated with that. What we did then after that was sheared all of the above ground equipment. That went to the low-level waste burial disposal for entombment. And then we grouted underneath the minus 60 of the structure, and then we put about a 6-foot thick concrete, heavily reinforced concrete cap on top of that former structure there. Did I miss anything on that one?
No. And of course, that was a time lapse. But that was a very important project in that it is in situ for the below ground and demolition on above ground. So it was a mixture of the integrated sampling model and our ECA.
So in talking about decommissioning end states, the objectives for the end states are to attain a final end state with minimal long-term stewardship, as Angela mentioned. Stabilize, isolate, remove contamination from or within the structure. To be protective of the industrial worker. We don't want to go out there and do something just to try to remove a component that puts the worker at risk. We want to make sure that if we leave something in place that it is protective of the groundwater, and we do groundwater monitoring associated with those cases where we leave waste in place. And then we want to make sure that there's no intrusion of humans or animals into the structure. So we go through a great effort to make sure that any openings or places where an animal could come in are closed so that there's no intrusion. This gives you a little bit of an idea about where we've come over the years. You can see that the program really began in earnest around the 2003 time frame, and then right around 11 and 12 after Recovery Act is when things slowed down for decommissioning on site. To date, we have closed 292 buildings since 1997, and that occupies about 3.4 million square feet of space that is no longer available. Current state of the program, this is the first year in several years that we've actually been able to stand up again some D&D efforts. We're in the initial stages right now of building our program, putting it together. We have $7 million in the program this year for D&D work, for planning and demolition. We have onboarded a mentor protege subcontractor who will be helping us with some of the smaller and basic structure D&D activities. We also have subcontract capabilities to reach out and get D&D personnel, both technical and project management. And we're also working on a larger basic order agreement to bring in larger contractors to do more complicated work, such as 235F, if you will, to have them in place as well. We have initiated planning and execution of small, low-hazard demolition projects. We have started that this year. That is ongoing. And then we have some more demolition planned for next year, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of those structures. And we also do support other site-wide D&D projects. As mentioned before, we've been doing some work for tritium over there in the SRTE complex. So these are some of the near-term projects we have. In the upper left-hand corner and middle of the upper is what's called a trebler. These treblers were above-ground structures that were part of the process sewer lines, these in the F area, that monitor the water from the canyon over to the seepage basins. They're rather unsightly, they're overgrown, they're not in use, so we're going to be going after those. Next year we'll be doing demolition on a heat exchanger building, the 690N. This D&D was part of a negotiation of milestone swaps associated with the liquid waste program. We were able to accelerate this into our program as a result. On the bottom, there's a deionizer trailer that's over adjacent from the board building, the process heat exchanger facility. We'll be getting rid of that. There's in area, there's a cast car repair facility that's so decrepit that it has guy wires literally holding it up. So I expect once we just snap the guy wires, the whole building will probably come down. And then we have modular offices. So just kind of give you a smattering of some of the things that we'll be working on for the next 2 years. Mentioned before, we do some work for others. This is in tritium. The building on the top we mentioned earlier on, this was the 232-1H construction shop that's been completed. Tritium is, and NNSA is now looking at deactivation and decommissioning of 236, 237, and 238 facilities. They are out doing deactivation right now in all 3 buildings in hopes that NNSA funding may come in to accelerate decommissioning in those areas. In conclusion, we have a mature program for conducting D&D work across the site. It's protective of human health and the environment. It is compliant with all federal regulations, state regulations, as well as Department of Energy orders as well. The manual 1C procedure really lays out the framework for everything that we have to do from a D&D perspective on site. Deactivation is completed as a precursor to decommissioning. And as Angela mentioned before, there's two components of decommissioning. One is bringing the facility to slab, and then the other is in situ decommissioning. And then we have successfully decommissioned 292 facilities over the last 15 years. And with that, be happy to take any questions or comments.
You know, Chris, if you need a place to test herbicide drones, I might have a place. Just saying. Let's start over here with Betty.
Good morning. Thank you very much for that presentation. I know this is everyday stuff for y'all. You've been doing it for 20 years, but it certainly is a great understanding for us what you have to go through to do this. And I love the before and after pictures. I mean, it makes us understand. And the only question I have, and I apologize, Joyce Underwood, our chairperson, is not here today, but she certainly was looking forward to this presentation. I was wondering on page 8, slide 8 and 13, the dome building. I was just wondering in the beginning, it's just an unusual design, and I was just wondering what the reasoning was, if you understand. I mean, why
a dome on that?
this building.
This one?
This was an unusual design. Anything about that?
It was. The facility was not used for weapons production like the 5 reactors were. It was strictly designed to test cladding material on assemblies. It was not at all there designed to do any nuclear mission work, if you will. It was more designed to help support the commercial industry for power production, for a power reactor.
Thank you. It just seemed to be an unusual design, so that, you know, I was just curious. Thank you very much.
Okay. Doug?
Doug Howard, Cap. Good morning. Thank you very much for your presentation. The question I have is, you have completed 292 out of 1,100 plus. Are you ahead or behind schedule as far as what you all have been forecasting?
Well, I'd say we were on schedule. We do what we consider area completion closures. So when an area completes its mission entirely is when we will go in and start doing the decommissioning work. For instance, in F area, we still have the tank farm. The F Canyon has been partially deactivated, so we wouldn't go into that area in totality until all of those missions are completed. We do bring out some facilities out of that schedule. We're looking at 235F now because of the hazards associated with that facility. So some facilities will be brought out of our scheduled area completion, but I would say for now, we do have some facilities that we like to go into the D&D with. One is the D area powerhouse complex. We'd like to go in and take that down, decommission that area. But I'd say that we are on schedule with a 2065 end date for EM, for environmental management at the site.
And one last question, is funding a problem at all?
Yes. It is, and from the site's perspective, of course, D&D is near and dear to my heart. My career aspiration is to hit the button to take down a facility, implode it. However, we understand that the site's missions are in the priority area. We want to do liquid waste remediation first. That's part of environmental management. So funding for that project and that system is critical. For F Canyon to continue operations, funding is critical. If we receive additional funding for D&D, we certainly are willing and able to do that. We have planning, strategic planning for D&D. So if and when we get additional funding, we'll be able to execute. So that's one of the things with the Ford building that we will be doing next year. We'll be doing it because we have planning already sitting on the shelf, working with DHEC and EPA to identify that facility for decommissioning. So we're able to execute that next year.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go over to Narendra.
Narendra Malik, CAB. I have two questions. First is, when you remove the asbestos from the tritium-related facilities, do you check it for rad contamination?
Yes, that facility did not do any radiological work. Radiological controls went in, did the monitoring, and verified there was no radiological conditions associated with that maintenance building.
How do you dispose of that radioactive, if you find any radioactive asbestos?
If the asbestos is found to be radioactive, it would go to the E area burial ground because of the low-level activity. That's an on-site disposal facility to handle low-level waste.
Okay, I'm just changing the topic from solid waste to liquid waste. When you do the tank closures, have you considered taking the equipment which is related to the closure tank and cut into pieces and put in the basket in the tank and before we close it and grout it?
Well, each tank has a closure plan that is discussed and approved upon by DHEC. So I do not believe that we will be introducing any more contaminants to the tanks. One of the things that we did consider in D&D, say for the reactors, was putting other contaminated equipment and or debris in before we grouted the below ground sections. And it was determined that if it was not from that area, that we could not do that. So we will not be introducing any more contaminants to the tanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Charles.
Charles Hilton, CAB, thank you for this presentation. When you do an in situ closure, and I'm looking specifically at Reactor, you're in the monitoring stage now where that's all that's being done. What is the cost of that per year?
I'm not sure.
Just the monitoring component to it, it's very little. I would say it's probably $50,000 a year or less just to monitor the groundwater and then to evaluate the vegetation on the roof.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Jerry.
Jerry Mossbarger, CAB. I know what grout is. I use it at home. But I've heard this term over and over and over. Could you explain the grouting process? What makes that knock the radiological stuff out?
Well, we have the lab, SRNL, will come in and they will formulate a grout for us. So every facility will have probably a different grout mixture such that the materials that go into it will help encapsulate and stop the movement of the contaminants. So it's not the Lowe's or Home Depot grout. We'll start there, but we do have SRNL telling us what other materials need to be a part of that mixture such that one is long lasting, and when I say long lasting, hundreds and hundreds of years, and putting in there things that will help to mobilize any contaminants that are left in the facility.
We also want the grout to be flowable so that when you start pumping it in, it will move throughout the floor and the structure. Other examples of going back to what Angela had mentioned, in the case of the reactor vessel in P area, it was not as simple, just go fill it with grout, with any type of grout, because there was a possibility of hydrogen reacting with that grout. So we worked with the national lab to come up with a very specific grout that could be used, that would be injected into the ushes and into the vessel itself to prevent any type of hydrogen buildup. So it's not just one cookie cutter type of a grouting approach. The other thing, like for example, with Hector, is there was still some in situ structure there beneath the grade, and we put a 5 or 6 foot 4,000 psi cap or cover on top of that to make sure that it would never grout or somebody accidentally run into that cap.
So when you're looking at 235F, is that right? 235F?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I know grout's been discussed. You fill it up, you may have to do something to the outside structure to make sure it doesn't explode or whatever it does, expand.
Mm-hmm.
Do you also have to put concrete around that, around the grout? If you did that, if you went that way?
Well, for the case of 235F, what we're doing right now is we're doing a design analysis right now to take a look at the integrity of the walls and the floor. And then what we would do is put a grout plan together. For example, it may be that the structure is sound enough for it, but you can only place it in, say, 6-inch lifts in order not to put too much pressure on the walls. But all of that is being evaluated right now by our design engineering organization. And they may come back and say, well, maybe you need to buttress up a particular side of the building. But that's kind of the approach right now in the early stages.
Malcolm.
Yes, when we did, Malcolm Phillips from CAB, when we decommissioned the SM-1 and SM-1A in the military, back in the 50s reactors, what we found is that the record keeping in the 50s were not pristine. And we found surprises, buried things that we really didn't understand were buried because there weren't good records. Are you finding surprises like that as you're going through the decommissioning process now, where record keeping wasn't pristine in the early 50s as to what they did with things?
We did, but what we do is we spend a tremendous amount of time up front, not only going through the documents, but also to assessing and characterize the building. And then we have teams that literally sit and come up with what if sort of possibilities, and we go and try to investigate all of those before we engage in the actual decommissioning process.
And one other thing that is very good at the site and is a best practice, we'll actually go out and talk to past operators, retirees, and ask them what really went on, what's in the closets, what happened that wasn't recorded. The drawings have been different, and that's why we go to a cold and dark status, where we'll take the power off outside of the facility, cut lines, because when we first started, we go in and start, and lo and behold, you have the power off and there's still lights on in a room. So yeah, we run into surprises.
We also have the capability of doing virtual analysis. So we set up these systems. The National Laboratory has this, along with the drawings. And you can, the D&D workers can literally put on goggles and walk through the tasks they're going to do. And they can see from what's on the other wall if I do something to this one here. And it's just tremendous, the technology that's out there in terms of virtual space that can help you find and recognize things you may never have identified before. When we did the P reactor closure, we did a reactor model. It was a big, huge plastic model. And that was really important because it helped us sequence how we were going to go do the work, and making sure that our crews understood, if you do this, this is what's on the other side over there. So make sure you progress in a very specific way of doing business. So I think if you couple the modeling along with this virtual technology of being able to go through the building, I think it minimizes a lot of the risk. And we even went through setting up mock-ups and walked our folks through mock-up structures to make sure that they were well practiced and versed before we put them in suits and to go do the work.
If I could make just one more comment with what Angela said, and that is, I think, critical and candidly, as more people are retiring now and getting older with the facilities that you're going to decommission in the future, you better grab that expertise now because it's not going to be available. But that was critical to us. Oh yeah, we buried that spent fuel rod in the over here in this area, and then once you start digging, you start seeing the surveys going up.
Yeah.
But if you don't grab that now, you're not going to grab it.
Exactly.
That's what we've done. We've actually, this year, we've been able to reach out to a couple of the folks that have extensive D&D experience and brought them in for technical and project support. So you're exactly right. That knowledge transfer is just absolutely, positively needed. And unfortunately, the longer we wait to do decommissioning, we lose these people that have that institutional knowledge.
Let's go over to Dave.
Dave Bavakis, CAB. I have two questions. First, on slide 11, the 105P reactor, the after photo. Do these buildings become like old houses if you take care of them, as long as you maintain them and repair them, that they'll be okay forever? Is it, and do you continue to have to do that monitoring of them forever?
They will go into long-term monitoring. The monitoring, though, is very low cost. The one thing that we do worry about is vegetation on the roofs. But one of the design things that we did do, most of the roofs are sloped such that there's a runoff of rainwater. And like Chris said, once a year we'll take the drones up to look for vegetation and then spray herbicide there. Most of the facility is grouted. The doors have been grouted shut and sealed. There are no windows in the facility, so there's literally no way anyone can get into the facility. But there will be long-term monitoring.
Thank you. Second question on slide 15, following up on Doug's earlier question on funding. You see that your completions, and I think you mentioned that, start to plateau in FY11. Is that solely because of funding, or is it because the projects take longer, the work gets harder, or?
A combination of most of the things you mentioned. At the end of 2011 into 2012 is when the Recovery Act was completed, where we had an acceleration of D&D. The other one thing that you mentioned, we still have operations in most of the other areas. So we will not go in to start the area completion mission. We do have some facilities that are awaiting decommissioning. One I mentioned was the D area powerhouse complex. So that's a lot of facilities that will probably be simple model that we'll go into and do decommissioning. So we're awaiting funding for that. 235F that has been presented to this CAB. We are looking for funding to go in and do decommissioning for that facility after the engineering has completed their analysis of what decommissioning looks like, and we start the process of discussions with DHEC and with EPA on that one.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, Bobby.
I can get the microphone on.
No switch. All you gotta do is pull it up to
Okay.
the side.
We don't have to switch it today.
No switch today.
Bobby Williams, CAB. Thank you for your presentation. Can you tell me how you remove the stack from 105P, the process that you used?
We used explosives with a very controlled professional team, subcontract team came out. We had a very specific target on where we wanted it dropped, and they dropped it dead on, right where it was supposed to go. There was a low-level tritium in the stack, and so what we did, instead of taking that over to the burial ground is we were able to entube that within the reactor structure itself so that we didn't generate waste source outside of there. It worked out very well that we could accommodate that stack within the structure of the reactor itself. Anything else you want to add to that that I may have missed?
And we did our reactor
ours the
stack
same
the same way. And then the stack at 235F, we actually took that down conventionally, I think, during recovery. So we like the implosion thing. We really do. So I'm looking for other structures we can do that with.
Okay, thank you.
Greg?
Greg Murray, CAB. Yes, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm sure that is very satisfying to knock down a building. Someday I hope to get to do it myself. So next year when you all come and give us your update and presentation, it looks like you've got 4 or 5 more projects in planning stages. Will that number have gone up from 292 to 296 or something along those lines? Is that what we should anticipate?
Yes. And
Okay.
what we have, some of the facilities that we're actually doing this year, in the portfolio, we consider our 1,100 plus facilities as gold metric facilities. Those are the larger facilities with a certain dollar amount associated with them. So I think the Treblers are not gold metric, but next year when we come and do the update, we're hoping we can tell you that we have at least 1 or 2 gold metric off of our list and planning in place to execute and take down a few more.
So these numbers on this slide just reflect the gold metric
Yes.
projects?
Yes.
Okay. All right, gotcha. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we mentioned possibility of taking a break at some point. Are we at that point where everybody needs a stretch, or are we ready to keep powering on?
Let's take a stretch so we're good.
Okay, let's take about 10 minutes, folks. 10 minutes.
I want people to be refreshed.
Well, everyone who's here is ready. We need a few more people. So let's go ahead and get started while everybody's working their way back in. Next up is the common infrastructure presentation. You know, yesterday we talked a little bit, especially during the IPL, about the two types of infrastructure. Dave's going to tell you about one of them today. This is an update over a presentation he gave last year. And please remember, just like we did earlier this morning, if you have any questions, put your tent card up and we'll get to everybody at the end of the presentation. All right. Dave?
Good morning. I'm Dave Bender. I'm with the AM for Infrastructure Environmental Stewardship. And it's very ironic that I'm speaking to you after my boss, Angela, said that she loves to demolish and take down facilities. And I'm here to talk to you about how we want to maintain these facilities and keep them viable for the future. So with that, we will talk about, James already introduced that I'll be talking about an update to the infrastructure brief that I gave about 6 months ago, back in September. And just wanted to, I think you all are very well schooled after the discussion yesterday about what is infrastructure. And our definition is any structure, physical structure, equipment that supports a defined mission. And what makes it common is that that infrastructure supports more than one organization, tenant, or mission. And that's what I'm here to talk about, is the common infrastructure. Yesterday, you all had a great discussion on what is programmed infrastructure, mission specific. And here is an example. We have the H Canyon, which you've already internalized into a PBS as 11C, which those dollars come directly to the site. Whereas common infrastructure, what I'll be talking about, basically the basic common infrastructure that includes facilities, roads, parking areas, bridges, etc., and our utilities. These are all funded by what we call indirects that come from the direct funding that we get through the PBSs, primarily as their funding source. And this is the puzzle chart. Put that up last time. It's in your packet too, just to give you a general breadth of Savannah Riverside. Savannah Riverside is essentially an industrialized county with our nearly, excuse me. There we go. With 310 square miles, we have dams, we have electrical transmission lines, we have ways to distribute that electricity. Of course, we have about 120 miles of roadways. We have our own railroad system with 3 locomotives. We have all the basic utilities for domestic water, sanitary sewer water, and of course we have fire water. We have 2 very unique, or fairly unique facilities. One is our river water system, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And of course we have 5 biomass steam plants which provide steam for our various processes as well as for environmental controls. And what I want to hit on for the first half of this my briefing today is our recent accomplishments that we've had. We've done a great job with our roads. Since last year, we've done almost 10 miles of resurfacing roads. The first stretch of road that we finished up earlier this FY by November was the stretch from New Ellington, or New Ellington Gate, all the way up to SJ and Z areas. And then we started later this year with starting from the Jackson Gate. That's the road that primarily feeds most of the folks who come to work from Augusta. Jackson Gate up to our Cloverleaf. And at the same time, while all this was going on, we've been replacing a series of culverts, and I'll talk about those later. That was on Road C, and Road C is that 2-lane road that runs right through the middle of Savannah Riverside. We've done a lot on buildings, referred to 716-2A, which several of you got a chance to tour last fall. We've been replacing a number of roofs. We always say we replace them with cool roofs, and you can see an example of that with the, notice it's reflective thicker coating. and the old black tar and pebbles that you used to see on old roofs. And we've done a lot of work on our utilities. I'll talk a little bit about our river water system later, as well as did a lot of work on our chilled water plants. There we go. A little bit more about our roads. Again, I talked about our from the intersection there on 2 Road all the way up to J, S, and Z areas. That was about 5.5 miles worth of resurfacing of 2-lane road there. And I mentioned about the culverts. One thing I want to talk about the culverts here is that there were existing culverts that were generally non-functioning. That was one of the reasons why the road deteriorated. Water would just seep through the road surface instead of running off. And we found that when we dug in and tried to replace the culverts, we found that when they built that road structure back in the 50s, that they connected the various pieces of drainage pipe with an asbestos mastic type material. So we made the determination, rather than try to deal with removing that, we just filled it, our favorite term now, grout. We grouted those up, and we ended up installing just new culverts very close to where the old culverts were. And we found that made the work go a lot faster than having to deal with the abatement of the asbestos material. One thing I want to point out is not all just milling up the pavement, but also, and putting it down, but also there's a lot of grunt work, so to speak, that has to be done on the shoulders of the road so that the pavement is aptly supported by the surrounding road base. And in our facilities, I mentioned, in about 716-2A, you all were in. A few of you toured last September timeframe. Got a new roof on that facility. Mentioned, may have seen the sails. Interesting bit of shade in front of our main dining facility at the center of the site. We call that building 766H, where all our training facilities are at as well. And so that makes it much more conducive to outdoor dining, as well as doing several habitability improvements, i.e. we were talking about new paint, doors, carpet, so to speak, in one of our other buildings up in A area. On the utility side of the house, we got 2 big chiller plants that provide chilled water for common HVAC environmental support for a number of our buildings, like SRNL in A area, and our 4 headquarters buildings up in B area is what these 2 chiller plants support. But what's kind of interesting, I found in this slide, were these old river water valve houses. And I might ask, what are those things? So the river water system, very unique system at Savannah River site. Like it sounds, we pull water out of the Savannah River. It supplied cooling water for the reactors. This system, its pipe is about as tall as I am in diameter. There's like 3 legs of it. It stretches over 8-9 miles. Goes up the hills and a lot of you in valleys. And so engineers, if you can imagine pipe full of water, that diameter, what could happen if you lost pressure or when you're filling it up with all the air? What happens to all that air that's in there? One, if the water rushes away, you're going to get a tremendous suction and the pipe would implode. Or B, as you push the water through, all that air has to go somewhere and it has to be released. So that's what these guys, these valves do. They allow the pipe to equalize air. So that's what, when I talk about the river water valve houses, that's what we're talking about, either replacing these old 50s structures with something more that's technologically more advanced and serves our purposes better. And some of the ongoing project work that we have the, my favorite project here, the A Area Firewater Project. That's because I'm currently the federal project director for that project. And what you see here is this is the pump house for the firewater system in A area. And what this house has, we had it manufactured off-site. It has the two sets of pumps inside the pump house. They put it together there They trucked it on site, and what you see in this picture is that we're lifting it up and we're about to put it on its foundation. We're also doing some major renovation work here in, we call it building 70347A, which is going to be our future in-processing one-stop. It's strategically located right there in A area, very close to the parking lot, so it's ideal for bringing new folks in, doing all their administrative work, giving their briefings, et cetera. So that's going to be a big improvement to bringing folks on board to the site. And it should be, we're looking for it to be wrapped up later this summer. We just got a last summer, Tritium, NNSA Tritium said that they needed to expand some of their facilities, and they need to relocate a 115 kilovolt power line. And very quickly we were able to work with SC&G, now Dominion Energy, to relocate about a half mile of that line around where this facility was going to be, and that just completed last week. And then we wrapped up our paving resurfacing work on Road C right up to and including the Cloverleaf just last week. And we're going to, as I'll talk about later, is starting next week, we're going to continue that work right on up Road C. And it's one thing that we do when it comes to doing projects with indirects is that we conservatively budget what work we can do each year based on how much work the programs are going to do. So it's kind of a second order effect, so to speak, when it comes to budgeting and planning. And so we budget to do so much work when it comes to the infrastructure landlord services funded work. And if it looks like the programs are able to accomplish more work and spend more, when they spend more of their allocated budget, then it's like a tax. It generates more dollars for indirects so that we can get more work done. So it looked like the programs were going to be able to spend more of the dollars that they had allocated, and we felt comfortable that we could turn on about $8 million more of work for the rest of the year. And to do that, we were able to, excuse me. Getting this right. So we were able to do another 3 miles on Road C. See right up here. And we were also able to put, Dr. Rhodes from SREL, Savannah River Ecology Lab, we're also going to put a roof on his facility, as well as do some interior renovations, one of our headquarters buildings there in B area. And we still had this in design, but we're also looking at putting a dedicated water line that's going to go to J area, where the salt waste processing facility is. And for future years, we still haven't tamed all the roof problems that we have. We know we have some roofs out there to go after. Our biggest roof that we want to do in the out years is going to be that facility where you saw the sails in front of 766H. A lot of our steam distribution lines are old and need some rework, as well as we still have several roads that we have to look at that are cheap arteries for getting folks in and out of the site. And also we've got to start looking at our 2 dams. We commissioned a study with the Corps of Engineers to look at our emergency spillways on Parr Pond and L Lake, and they're going to be doing that for us starting later this summer. And we're always trying to better, here we are at the River Water Pump House, try to improve and make our switchgear more reliable and efficient. And I would be remiss to talk about how we build that into sustainability, being more energy efficient. I will figure this clicker out before this briefing's over, or not. But anyway, here we got the project, the millings from all the roads. this past year, we pulled off 19,000 tons of roadway millings, and we were able to reutilize those on our secondary roads, primarily to the road to Adder Range, and that represents about 1,000 truckloads of these millings. So we're not just hauling that off to like our construction and demolition landfill, we're actually reusing all that material. And the millings that we're going to be pulled off our future projects, our Sears Crow has a home for those too. And they're going to be taking those off our hands rather than, again, going into a landfill. We're also, we always brag about our cool roofs, making our facilities more energy efficient when we replace those roofs. And I have another slide right after this. I'm going to talk about solar power very briefly. And finally, we're always looking at ways we could right-size our infrastructure so that it's more efficient, more reliable, and we're not wasting energy maintaining, overabundance of infrastructure that we really don't need. In specific, when A area fire water system gets replaced and operational later this fall, we're going to be looking at what we can do about taking down the old service water system and not having to need the current tank that also served as a service water system as well as the fire water system. Utility, okay, the solar power. We all have an open recommendation for you all, and thank you for that, because what it did, we got to talking about it. We decided, yeah, we'll dip our toe in the solar world and see what we can learn about. Can we bring utility scale solar to Savannah Riverside? And what we did, we put together a request for information, went out to industry. We gave in the request, gave them general description of the site, kind of our utility rates, what we pay currently, and just to see if anybody had some good ideas. But we asked them to look at utilities scale solar. We're talking 1 megawatt of power up to like 10 megawatts of electric power. And we are also looking at, can we turn our solar plant into a test bed where SRNL can also look at ways to make solar power more efficient. We enlisted the aid and advice of a solar power expert at SRNL, Dr. Elise Fox, and she helped us out craft this RFI. It went out back in March. We got responses back at the mid-April. We had like 14 responses. But 8 of them just pretty much gave their company's credentials. Like, okay, this is what we do. 3 of them asked for a little bit more information, and 3 also brought up the fact that, we need to do something about power storage as well. So we learned a lot by going through this process. We're also in the middle of a kind of a revolution. I don't call it a revolution, but that's a good word. Kind of a turning point when it comes to electrical power in South Carolina. As most of you all well know, that SC&G was bought out by Dominion Energy after the VC Summer nuclear plant was shut down. A year ago, we were basically, for our industrial rate that we get for the site, we were paying anywhere 8.5 cents to maybe 9 cents for a kilowatt hour. Now we're paying about, I'll just say when I looked at last month's bill, it was like 6.6 cents. So trying to measure where we're going with that. And the big question we have when it comes to solar power is, can we make the economics work? As the break point is right around 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Now we're paying for a kilowatt, just on the strict energy, we're paying now like 4.2 cents a kilowatt hour is about what we pay. And a year ago it was a nickel. So the price has been coming down because the rate cuts that we got because of the Dominion Energy SC&G merger. Our biggest impact that we have on the site that we thought solar would make a big difference on the economic side is on the demand side of our bill. Because we have an industrial rate, we pay a very much lower price for the energy itself, whereas you may at your house pay 14, 15 cents a kilowatt hour. We're paying, like I said, a nickel down to, right now we're down to like 4 cents. But we then, depending on what our demand is for a month, that gets measured and we get a bill on that. And where we thought solar would make a big impact, because most of our peaks in demand are during the day, well, you know, that's when the sun's out. But we learned that it would be, essentially the solar power would be like a peak shading mechanism to keep our peaks lower. That would definitely have a drastic effect on the bill. But we found that through experience talking with Dominion Energy, is that that's not always the case. And that's where, for solar to really help us out on the economic front, that we would need to some kind of power storage and see how that would work into the picture. So bottom line is we're learning a lot as we go through examining bringing utility scale solar power to Savannah and Riverside. We're not there yet. We've asked the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to come do an assessment for us and see what they think. So we look forward to them coming this summer and giving a good assessment of Savannah and Riverside and its potential. And we'll be reporting more on that result later on. Should be by September at the September CAB meeting. We've interesting water line. I'm going to shift gears now to domestic water and water lines. About 2 years ago, we noticed we were seeing a lot of water line breaks at Savannah Riverside, and so we looked at our utility guys and said, let's plot this out and analyze it, see what our trends are. So what we did, we put together maps. Where were the breaks at? What kind of pipe it was? What system it was on? And lo and behold, it turned out that the majority of our breaks were from what's called PVC, you know, plastic pipe that most people have in and around their house. And it was on our domestic water system. And as you can see, we noticed quite a bit of an uptick in the last 2 years. Just last year, 30 PVC pipe breaks. And I put this is A area, by the way. And just to give you an idea of the random nature, we just put the locations of the water leaks that we had in a year period up in A area. So you can see they're kind of random. And we did this for all the sites areas and found that, okay, it's random in nature. We can't really pin it down to just one or two different lines. And we were asking ourselves, well, how do leaks cause? What causes a leak? We have metal pipe, basically, that's made out of ductile iron or carbon steel. And of course, you know, eventually corrosion, we'll get to that. We don't have too many problems at all with freezing. Occasionally there'll be some overpressure that will cause a weak pipe to fail. But a lot of issues that I'll talk about in a second. Things could happen because of installation error. When you put a pipe in the ground, it's not just like you dig a hole and put it in. You need to make sure it's encased in, you put sand, some consolidated material around it so it doesn't have rocks. You want it off roadways, for instance, and you want to make sure that it's not stressed in any way. And what I wanted to point out here on this, one of these pictures is that sometimes when you have a break, an old line especially, something happens when after that line was put in, somebody builds a building or two on top of it. So when it breaks, in this case, this is in S area, these are temporary buildings. We had to put a temporary line in and around these buildings to get the domestic water restored again before we could come back and do a major repair and restore the actual line. Same with, actually, this leak right here was directly underneath a little pump house, too. So it was quite a challenge to finally get to. One, to find it, and then finally to get to it and finally repair it. So when we did our analysis, we found that it looked like that the majority of our PVC problems were due to installation errors. This is a good good picture. I don't know if you could see it very well on here, but there's a slight kink in this line right here. As we uncovered it, we found that the line was stressed. And this is what caused, can't see it, but there's a long crack right here that we believe was caused because when this line was put in, it was put kind of at a crook of an angle. That was put in over 20 years ago. That's just an example of an installation error that we are seeing when we examine each leak, because we do a forensic analysis of it. We try to make a determination: was it corrosion, was it a rock, was it a lack of proper fill around the pipe before they covered it up, or it was just put in a location where heavy trucks were driving off of it and eventually crushed it. And we feel like our domestic water system in this case is well maintained. We pass our annual inspections. We do a required bit of flushing to keep the sediments from building in the line. And we're just right now, what we're doing, we're continuing to analyze every repair we make. Again, we do an analysis of what caused it so we can trend it. And we're looking at each line and making a hardcore determination on whether or not should we just go ahead and replace that line if we've had repeated problems with it, or just replace that section of pipe and keep track of it. And this isn't meant to just totally destroy your eyeballs, but I call this my morale chart because I like looking at this chart occasionally, mainly to see this is where we were in March of 2014. Then I look at, okay, where are we at in March of 2019? Take a big step back and see how the landscape, at least the condition of our different systems has changed. And obviously we're not completely there yet. Of course, ideally our vision is to be green in all of the different systems, but we're seeing progress in the last 5 years from with generally yellow with some reds to pretty much predominantly yellows and greens. And when I look at these charts, and I'll look down on the second page where it lists all the different projects that we have on the unfunded list, I'm happy to say that most of those projects have been taken care of. So we're making progress over the last 5 years. And with that, I think we've got a pretty good realistic disciplined planning approach. We put together a 5-year plan. Every year we put together a plan, what we're going to execute the following year. And then we grade our contractor on how well they execute that plan. So I believe we are disciplined there. Again, we like to think we're innovative. Always seek out new ideas and suggestions on how we can do things better, smarter to maintain our facilities. And like our facilities that get old, a lot of our workforce is aging, retiring, and we're also become, I would say, very successful in bringing on a new generation of workforce and getting them trained up. The biggest challenge that we'll have, and it's ironic that I'll be followed up by John Lopez to talk about resourcing, and that's exactly what we need. We just need consistent, reliable resourcing to maintain our infrastructure systems. And that concludes my brief. I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay. Let's start with AK over here.
Okay. Savannah, you made a cost analysis.
AK, can you pull it up closer for me?
Okay, I'm sorry.
I want to make sure that we record you for the minutes.
I'm sorry. AK Hassan Kaya. Mr. Bentley, you made a cost analysis in terms of cost savings with electrical power, part of it, I guess by default because of the one company, being bought out and changed over, et cetera, and some others due to decisions being made. And then you were also talking about that in relationship to the cost for solar panels, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, there has been so many arguments made about the environmental safety aspect of solar panels, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was just trying to find out in terms of cost and environmental safety, et cetera, are you all weighing that in terms of how much more aggressive you might at some point become with solar, or whether it's not really necessarily any real advantage in expanding?
No, that's a very good question, very good points, and we are considering it. Many companies take that very attribute into account. They'll tell you up front how their panels are recyclable, and so that when they do have to be replaced. And one of the things that we want to do is use existing, we will say brownfields or cleared space on Savannah Riverside, specifically around A and M areas, you know, where all the plant used to be. If you come up that road, we've got acres and acres of where facilities are, cleared area where now all we do is do environmental monitoring and cleanup. So we would want to lessen our environmental footprint with a solar field by using that area. Plus, it's right there next to SRNL too, so it would be very conducive for their test bed.
Something to keep in mind, and I don't want to cut off any further questions about solar necessarily, but we are going to get an extensive presentation in September about that. And they're going to talk about the study that Dave mentioned and all that stuff. So that'll be a great time for us to really go into detail on those.
Yeah, I didn't mean to.
No.
I didn't want to go too much into the cost, but I really want to get in part is that we learned a lot by exploring the solar initiative and how do you make it work economically? Because for the government, we don't get the tax incentives that others would get. So it's really trying to get that cost point where we're not, you know, having to pay out of our infrastructure budget just to say we had solar. We want it to make money for us as well. Okay. Brian?
Brian Chemsak, CAB. On your domestic water system, is each building metered? And if so, do you know what the water loss rate is for the site and the system?
Good question. No, not. We don't meter every building. It's metered by area. I do not have the answer for our water loss rate. I'll have to find out.
Narendra.
Narendra Malik, CAB. Dave, thank you very much for this very nice presentation. I have 3 questions. Number 1, last month we took a tour of, or maybe this month, of Edge Canyon. When we were outside the facilities, we saw the support pillars with the chemical pipes are being transferred to the canyon. They are rusted. Are you considering them as a infrastructure to be maintained properly and repaired?
I'm not sure where you mean.
So-
There were what pipes coming from the canyon?
The support structure in the outside facilities in Edge Canyon, there appear to be some of them very much rusted.
This is Mike McLean, DOE. Narendra, those pipes are not part of the common infrastructure that David is talking about here. Those supports are part of the outside facilities for H Canyon and are covered by PBS 11.
I didn't get it.
And we do consider that as part and do evaluate the structural integrity of those supports.
Exactly with those pieces of infrastructure.
Okay. My second question is about the solar panels. I see nice presentation on solar panels here on slide 12 and 13. Last year, CAB members submitted a recommendation that when you're renovating the buildings on the roof, put new solar panels or enclosed by empty lots to provide the power. Somehow it was not accepted based that it's not economically feasible. I request you to please visit that recommendation again and give serious consideration on thinking that, yeah, it's feasible, not only based on a simple economic analysis, but we need to look for long term. Could it be possible? And I think James can provide the recommendation back if it's okay with you.
So that recommendation, that presentation we talked about in September is going to be in direct support of that recommendation. It's the result of it. It's the follow-up of everything. So I imagine that question right there is going to be answered by what you see in September. Let's hold off and ask that then.
Okay.
Okay.
But we did look at that, and that's why we answered that for existing buildings, that would be very difficult to make that, even in the long term, viable. For new buildings, most definitely it'd be something that'd be considered. In fact, the government does have a system called LEED, in which you get points for adding sustainability measures such as solar panels on roofs as part of your overall score.
My third question is about the sanitary sewer lines. Do you ever conduct any infiltration inflow analysis to see that there is no rainwater from the ground entering the sewer lines going to the treatment facility?
I'll have to check on that for certain.
Thank you.
Malcolm?
Good presentation, thank you. I was intrigued about the water pipe leak trending exercise, because that almost was taking a problem and throwing it into your corrective action program, if you would, where you had trend analysis and root cause analysis and all that other stuff. Do you do the same with other type issues? Now, I just started thinking about roads as an example. Okay, we had road failures here. Why did this fail? Do we see something that we can then preserve the roads longer by looking at the root cause of the failure? Or the roof leaks? That's question one. And question two, do you share this trend data and the root cause data, if you would, with other sites, which undoubtedly have the same type issues that you're dealing with here as well?
Good questions. We used to, last question first, we have not recently when it comes to discussing with counterparts from other sites. And that's something that we could probably definitely get better at. As far as, definitely if we see a trend, we'll definitely look and see if there's a root cause behind it. And if, I'm trying to think about any other recent examples other than water leaks. But yes, we would definitely look hard at a problem if we see it happen more than once, and see if there's a similarity there, to see if it's endemic throughout the site, and we can solve it. And, kind of we call it extended condition review.
It's interesting because as you described the water pipe issue, it almost sounded like it was flowed through your corrective action program, which maybe it doesn't. Which doesn't say, oh, if we see a trend, we'll do it. It forces you to, your corrective action program, it forces you to look at that as a potential, and the common cause and root cause analysis of each of the issues that go through. But I guess this is not part of your corrective action program. This is separate from your corrective action program.
Yes, I would say it would be. I should say another example would be electrical distribution, or a lot of the relays, for instance. We have old ones, they trip occasionally. We can't find out why, so we're always replacing the relays and also insulators on all our distribution lines, as many as possible. We've had a number of those fail, as well as some grounding, and also hardening a lot of our transformers and our substations from animals get in there, and they build things, and that tends to cause electrical problems. But that's another example that we've recognized that our deteriorating infrastructure needs a little bit of help.
Does all this data fold into a corrective action program, or are you separate from the corrective action program?
I would say we treat it separately. We do have a structure, a system where corrective actions get formulated in STAR. We tend to realize them, put them into our 5-year or 1-year plans.
Angela, did you want to follow up some?
Yes, just a follow-up for that. I'm sorry, Angela Holmes, DOE. Dave and his group have developed from a strategic look. They've developed plans to go after these different systems. One, we've talked about the different roofs that are being replaced, the road system, now the water system. So where we do go out and do corrective actions on a single line break, we are looking strategically to look at areas where we may have to go in and replace entire water lines. So corrective actions such that if we have a break, we'll go in and then do maintenance and fix the leak. But from a strategic standpoint, we are looking area by area to go in and fix different lines and other systems.
It just as though I think we're talking past each other a little bit. I know there's a formal program called the Corrective Action Program.
Yes.
And that folds into all things where you have a problem. Okay, we discover a problem, that folds into your corrective action program. It's a process that you can deal with it.
Right.
But it appears that this is outside that typical program that you see, which is interesting why it's not inside it.
Well, we're trying to just take that strategic look instead of multiple line breaks on the same, like domestic water in A area. We've had, I think there were probably 8 line breaks that Dave showed on the picture of A area. So we've decided to go strategically and look at that. It may be time for replacing domestic water lines in different areas.
But you require your contractors to have that corrective action program, and you focus on that routinely. So this appears to be doesn't do that. That may be.
So I think that maybe what we can do here is, Angela, can you maybe sit down with Malcolm during the next break for a few minutes and maybe talk this out?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go to Betty and then Doug.
Thank you. Betty Cook, Cab. Thank you very much for the presentation, and we really appreciate the time and effort you put into these. I'd like to look at slide 4 when we're talking about the water, the chill water and the water plants, steam plants and all. Is some of this like a waste treatment plant? I'm sure there's a waste treatment plant on the facility, right?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so which, is any of that a waste treatment or?
We would call a little toilet stool up there. Anybody
Okay.
clean this sanitary waste?
Okay, thank you. One other comment on page 7, talking about the outdoor dining area.
Hey,
I'd like to say that some of us cab members, last tour, we enjoyed the outside dining area. It was very nice. Thank you very much.
There we go. I was just going to brag that I mastered this thing that I had, and so, yeah, the little cells out there, yeah.
Thanks, Betty. Doug?
Doug Howard Cap. As always, Dave, we enjoy your presentations. Stay on that slide 7 if you would, please. That building 716 2 Alpha, last year when we went through our tour, I believe that's one of the buildings that we saw. Is that the Sanitary, one of the Sanitary buildings?
Yeah, I was given a choice. I could either put the building number or I could put what the building is.
Okay.
So I just opted for the building numbers.
All right. Well,
that's my chuckle is because, well, I shouldn't, but the security screen said I couldn't put the description of the building up there.
Yeah, if my mind serves me right, I think during that tour we saw, or you told us that there was, you all were incurring some problems with the rain drainage of that building. Was that true? And were you able to get it fixed the way you thought you could?
Yeah, yes, we were. The roof took care of it. It's nice and dry now. Took care of the mold that we were getting that was building up. And of course, you saw the renovation in which we stripped the mold away and put new wall coverings and paint up. So it's a beautiful building now.
Great job. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Dave? All right, thank you, sir. All right. John, you ready to give a budget update? Yes, sir. Let's go for it.
Good afternoon. My name is John Lopez. I'm with the DOE. I'm the Director of the Office of Integration and Planning. And today I'm going to be giving you an update on the process that we go through as a site for preparing our budget. And then I also want to give you an update on the fiscal year 20 budget that was released in February of this year. So those of you who have been on the cab, you've seen this slide before. Those of you who are new, this is the budget process that we go through. So I want you to think about the middle of this circle being the current fiscal year. So this is fiscal year 19 in here. The first ring out is fiscal year +1. So this outer ring here is fiscal year 20, and then the next outer ring is fiscal year +2, so this is fiscal year 21 out here. So I want to kind of go through now to tell you about where we are in the current fiscal year. So for the first time in 22 years, Congress passed a budget on September 30th, so we were able to start out this fiscal year knowing exactly what we were going to have for the full fiscal year. So there's a lot of benefits to that, and Dave talked about it in his presentation on infrastructure. We did a lot of roof replacements and road replacement work this year. Typically, when we're under a continuing resolution, we don't start that work. Our continuing resolutions have been lasting 3 to 6 months. We never start that infrastructure work until later in the fiscal year because we don't know what our funding is going to be for the year. And that kind of stuff can either, whether you get the funding or don't get the funding, can be either on or off the table. This year, since we knew on October 1st what our funding was going to be for the fiscal year, we were able to turn on a lot of that infrastructure scope much sooner than what we normally do. And as a result of that, we've already paved part of Road C at the beginning of the fiscal year. Now we're going to pave another, I don't know, Dave, what you say, another 5-6 miles of Road C for the remainder of the fiscal year. So there's a lot more infrastructure work that we were able to accomplish this year because we knew what our funding was going to be on October 1st. So I can't emphasize enough how much that means to us as a site for planning, knowing what your funding is going to be early in the fiscal year. So we got our money here. OMB was giving us 30-day allotments. They didn't give us all of our money up front. They were just giving it to us in 30-day chunks. But it really didn't have an impact on the way we executed at the site because we had plenty of carryover funds, and that with that new money we were able to execute our mission. But here we are now in May. I believe last month, or I think it was March, we got our full allocation for the site. So we got all of our fiscal year money in March. We were able to obligate that on our contracts. So for fiscal year 19, we're set as far as our funding for the site. So where are we with fiscal year 20? The president released his budget in February for fiscal year 20. So here we are in May. Last month, or a couple weeks ago, we had calls with the House Energy and Water Development Subcommittee members and the Senate Energy and Water Subcommittee members. And they're doing things a little different this year than what they've done in the past. Typically, those committees would funnel questions through headquarters. Headquarters would send them down to the sites. The sites would respond to those questions. They'd go through a review at headquarters, and they'd get back to these committee members. That process sometimes took a couple months. It was way too long. So this year, the Senate and Energy Water folks said, the House and Senate folks said, we're going to contact each site directly with our set of questions, and we want the sites to respond directly back to us without going through headquarters. So headquarters, of course, was involved in those calls, and they were involved in our response. But the response went directly from the site to those committee members, and we were able to turn around those questions in a matter of 3 to 4 days. So that hopefully in the future that will help alleviate any delays and frustration that we were getting from Congress on DOE responding to the questions. What's also interesting is, the House is Democrat, the Senate is Republican. On that call, there were both House and Senate, so Republican and Senate, all working together behind the scenes to develop their budgets and responses for each one of the sites. So here we are in May. We're expecting this summer, the House and Senate will both pass their versions of the fiscal year 20 bill that they call the MARC. So typically they're different. The House will pass a bill, the Senate will pass a bill, then they go through a reconciliation process. Hopefully, with the process that we're going through now, the House and Senate bills will not be that much different between when they pass their marks, and that reconciliation process will be relatively simple. So this summer, we'll get the marks, Each site will respond to those marks on what the impacts of those marks are, and then hopefully by the first of the fiscal year, we'll have another budget. Now, I'm not real hopeful with that because we have a divided House and Senate, but if we could get another bill on October 1st, just like we did last year, that would mean the world to the sites. So that's fiscal year 20. So where are we with 21? That's this outer band here. So in April, all the sites got together. I went to headquarters with a few of my staff, and we met with all the other DOE sites on fiscal year 21 planning. Each site was given 2 targets, a low target and a high target. And then we had to develop what we call our integrated priority list of scope that we can and can't do within each one of those targets. We all went together in headquarters, all the sites, we sat around a room very similar to this, and each site made their presentation on what they can and can't do. What we're expecting at the end of May here is we'll get a final target from headquarters on this is what we want you to start planning to in fiscal year 21. And then we'll develop our budget for fiscal year 21. We'll submit it to OMB. OMB in the November-December time frame give us what they call a pass back. They get all the agency budgets, okay, and then they give a pass back to the agencies and say, thank you for your input. Now here's the budget we want you to plan to or develop your narratives to for the president's budget request. So we go through that exercise in the November-December timeframe, and so then by next February, the FY21 president's budget will be released for 21. So that's the process that we go through each fiscal year. It doesn't change much. The timing changes a little bit month by month, but the process is the same every fiscal year. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, PBSs, or Program Baseline Summaries. Basically, when Congress passes a bill, we get our money in 4 buckets. We call those congressional control points. So we have risk management operations, which is made up of 5 PBSs. And then we have 14C, which is liquid waste, security, and PBS 100. When Congress passes a bill, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 control points. When we finally get the money, OMB asks us for a spend plan. So we develop spend plans for each one of those PBSs. And we do at that point, we do have the ability to move our money around between PBSs. But once we submit those spend plans to OMB, OMB gives us what they call a Category B restriction. They say you cannot move money from this PBS to this PBS unless you come back to us and ask. So it's very important when we develop those spend plans that we get the money in the right buckets. We also do not have the ability to move money from here to here or any of these without going back through Congress, okay, because those are the congressional control points. We have to go back to Congress to move money from risk management operations to one of those other PBSs. So, we do our planning 2 years ahead of time for fiscal year 21. So here we are in 19, we're planning for 21. We really need to be able to look into the future and anticipate what our costs are going to be for each one of these programs. So it's a huge effort that we all go through. We work with our contractors, they develop long-range plans, our AMs work with their staff, and we develop what we think we're going to be doing in the next 2 years. Something different that's happened this year is headquarters wanted to take a little bit more of a long-range look. So they really asked us to give them a budget for a 5-year window. So we really had to develop our plan for each one of those PBSs for the next 5 years. So headquarters is trying to take a more strategic look on how we're allocating money between each one of the sites. So that's why they're looking at more of a 5-year window instead of just a 1-year window. Before I go through the numbers, I want to talk a little bit about our pension. Many of you are familiar with this chart, but it's a little different this year. As you'll notice at the top of this chart, it's flat. Typically, this is a mountain chart that goes up and goes down. Right now, this is 300 million. This would, if this was a mountain chart, it would have peaked out at about 340 million. For fiscal year 21, we decided as a site, EM and NSA, to do something a little different. We wanted to eliminate that peak and make it easier to plan from one year to the next. So what we decided to do was go with a flat funding profile for our pension. Typically for pensions, we pay what they call the ERISA minimum. That's the minimum required by law to contribute to the pension. In fiscal year 21, that number is 239 million. But we've decided to pay our pension at 295 flat, 295, 296 flat. So we're paying more than what we're required to by law to eliminate that peak in the out years. So some may ask, well, yeah, that's great to do that, but it's also going to cost the site more money in fiscal year 21. But we have something very unique that's happening right now at the site with NNSA. If you look at this chart, the yellow or orange is NNSA contribution. The blue is the EM contribution. What's happening to NNSA's contribution? It's increasing. Why is NNSA's contribution increasing? Because they're looking at tripling the amount of spending they're going to have at the site over the next 4 to 5 years. So in fiscal year 19, they're paying 25% of the pension. You're out here in 21, 22, 23, they're paying 40% of the pension. So even though our pension costs are going up in 21, NNSA is going to start contributing more of that pension. And why is that happening? The MOX project was a contractor, CBI. They were paying nothing into the pension because they were not using any of the site labor. That was a separate subcontract. Well, now MOX has been canceled, and the transition of MOX has been moved over to the M&O contractor. Guess what? The M&O contractor pays pension. So now that MOX transition is now paying a piece of the pension program. You've all read in the paper about the pit production project at SRS, okay? That's now going to be done, as of right now, is going to be done using the M&O, okay? M&O pays pension. Guess what? Now NNSA's new mission for pit production is now contributing to the pension fund here. There's a tritium sustainment project going on, big capital project. We're already doing tritium at the site, but they're investing millions of dollars in a tritium sustainment capital line item project. And I think Dave showed you one of the power lines that are going in. So that's another big investment by NNSA to the site. Guess what? When NNSA spending goes up, they pay more of the pension contributions. Another way that benefits us is Dave talked about common infrastructure. How is common infrastructure paid for? Through indirects, okay? Who pays the indirects? The M&Os pay the indirects. So as NNSA's scope is going up, they're paying more of the indirects on site. So if we hold our indirect spending flat and NNSA is paying more of that, that helps EM. That gives EM more buying power. And we've actually lowered our indirect rates in the out years because NNSA is increasing their spending in the out years and picking up more of the indirects on costs. So there's some huge benefits that's going on at the site right now with NNSA increased spending, and they're doing that with our M&O contractor. So it's a huge benefit to the EM program. We're going to be able to turn more of our spending, instead of going into indirects, it's going to go back to the programs to spend for mission scope and in infrastructure. So let's go to the numbers here. I don't have a great story, I have a good story to tell about the numbers. We can always use more money, all right? But just at a bottom line, look at for fiscal year 18, fiscal year 19, $80 million increase for the site. Fiscal year 19, for what was projected for fiscal year 20, is a $91 million for the site. So SRS's EM program funding has been going up over the past few years. Now, EM's budget's also been going up as well. So EM in fiscal year 18 had a $7.2 billion budget. In FY19, that has $7.2 billion budget. But in fiscal year 20, it went down. It's down to 6.4. But here's the thing. In 18 and 19, we requested about the $6.4 million level, but Congress actually gave EM more money than what we asked for. So hopefully some of those dollars will end up coming to the site. A lot of it went to sites to do infrastructure, and a lot of it went to do excess D&D. Angela would love to have some excess D&D money. We have buildings sitting there waiting to get done. Hopefully we can get some more money in fiscal year 20 to do some of that excess D&D. So let's look at each PBS. PBS 11, nuclear materials, their budget has been going up about $10 million a year. 18 and 19 were good years, even though we didn't get what we requested. However, we had some outside funding sources from the Canadian fuel project that we were doing and NNSA. They were supplementing the the nuclear materials program by about $35 million. So even though 20 has gone up about $10 million, we do have a problem in 20 that we've actually talked to the House and Senate committee members, is that our Canadian dollars and the NNSA dollars are going away after fiscal year 19. So in order for us to be able to do what we did in 19, we need about additional $20 million, $15 to $20 million in fiscal year 20 to be able to do the same work that we did in 19 for nuclear materials. So we communicated that to the House and Senate. Hopefully they'll be able to get us additional money for that. Solid waste went up about $7 million. That's primarily as a result of some characterization work that we got to do for shipments to WIP. And also there's a performance assessment that we need to do in E area that I think, Jim, how often we do that? Every 5 years or so? So every 5 or so years we got to do a performance assessment of E area. That's going to be done in fiscal year 20. So Angela talked about D&D dollars. Look what's happening with PBS 30. Their funding is gone down $10 million or so a year. That's primarily a result of the D area ash basin, major remediation project at the site. That work is completing, so that's why their work has gone down. It was very active in 18, it completed in 19, and so we do have some remediation work planned for 20 that Angela talked about, but not near at the scale that we were doing in 18 and 19. S&M, deactivation, this is where 235F deactivation is. So 18 and 19, we're going to do about the same work we did in 20 as we did for 19 for the 235 deactivation project. Infrastructure and land management, big drop between 19 and 20. That's primarily a result of the area firewater project that Dave was talking about being completed in fiscal year 19. So we don't need any additional funds in 20, so that's primarily the reason of the drop between 19 and 20, because the A area firewater project completed. Also under PBS 42, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, there are line items. We have 3 line item projects underneath PBS 42. One is the EOC replacement project. That was actually authorized in fiscal year 18, and as you can see, the funding for that has steadily gone up for each year. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen the Emergency Operations Center in A area. It's in the basement of the old admin facility. It's not a good place to work. Underground, mold infested, but right now that's the only place that we have, so we're going to replace that Emergency Operations Center with a brand new state-of-the-art facility. Security replacement. This project was authorized in 15, but it wasn't a line item. Congress decided in fiscal year 19 they wanted to make that a line item. So this is access control to H, K, L, and SR and L area. Any person that's got to go in there has got a badge in and out. The system that we have there is very archaic, so we're replacing that security access system with a new state-of-the-art facility or system for that area. Mike talked about the AMC yesterday. brand new line item project, $50 million to build a state-of-the-art facility at USC Aiken. So we've got a lot of support from DOE, a lot of support from from Congress on that project. Hopefully it gets approved in the fiscal year 20 and we can get started with the construction of that project. Gil talked yesterday about liquid waste. We've had a lot of conversation about our #1 priority at the site. Look what's happening to the funding for liquid waste. 637, 696, 797, $100 million increase between 19 and 20. What's that for? Well, when SWPF, which is a capital line item project, when they complete construction and complete operations, or commissioning, I mean, the operations of that facility moves into 14C. So SWPF is construction and commissioning. That's the line item. Once commissioning is completed, currently projected for December, the operations of that facility then moves into 14C. So this big increase is primarily for the operations of that facility and tank prep activities. And I think Sonny's going to talk about this afternoon. If you're going to, right now we've got ARP MCU processing, 1 million, 1.5 million gallons of salt a year. In fiscal year 20, with SWPF starting, you're going to be up to 6 million gallons per year. Well, in order to feed the beast, you got to have more tanks prepared, more infrastructure on those tanks to be able to feed the SWPF facility. So this $100 million increase is for operations of that facility and to prepare tanks to be able to feed the SWPF facility. So once you feed the SWPF facility, all that grout's got to go somewhere. So right now we have 3 line item projects to build saltstone disposal units. Right now SDU 7 is currently under construction, as long as SDU 8 and 9. So those are major line item projects that are sequenced in order to be able to, they're kind of just-in-time delivery. It takes 18 months to fill one of those units. So we've planned out our funding and our schedule for that based on projected throughputs through SWPF in order to have an SDU ready when it's, as one finishes, we'll have one ready so we can continue that operation. We really don't want to be in a situation where we got to slow down SWPF because we don't have SDUs built. So it's very important that we get these things built, ready. Whenever the salt production comes, they're ready to receive that material. We talked a lot about PILT yesterday. Our 19 requests did not include PILT. Congress plussed us up and gave it to us. Our 20 requests, once again, does not include PILT. Our conversations with the House and Senate, they're aware of this. I'm confident that they're going to take care of that. Whether they're going to have us or give us additional money or tell us to take it out of hide somewhere, that's yet to be seen. But they're aware of the situation, and hopefully that gets resolved when we have a spending bill. Safeguard and securities. When we submitted our budget in fiscal year 20, part of this 179 should have been put up here. This security replacement project, when OMB submitted the numbers, there was a mistake made, so it was about $5 million in this 179 that really belongs up here in the security replacement projects. We've talked to the House and Senate about that. They're aware of that, and hopefully when they pass the final bill, they're going to move that money up there. The rest of that increase are for some security infrastructure projects that's going on. They have maintained all the gates on site, their weapons, their helicopters. It's all maintaining those facilities and equipment, and regular escalations. So that's basically the increase for safeguard and security there. So it's not a great story, but it's a good story. Our funding is going up. Between fiscal year 19 and 20, EM's budget actually went down by $700,000, but ours went up by 700 million, but ours went up by 91 million. So even though EM's budget for 20 went down, we actually at the site got $91 million increase from over our 19 amount. So there's a lot of good things to say that are happening out there. Everybody recognizes we built this $2 billion SWPF facility. Shame on us, shame on the taxpayers if we don't fund it. There's a lot of support with funding that facility and funding this program, getting it done, process that salt, empty those tanks, and get it done. So there's a lot of support in DOE and the House and Senate for funding our liquid waste program. Questions?
Well, let's start over here with Robert.
Bob Smith, Aiken Cab. Is there any way to quantify the impact of having an approved budget versus not having an approved budget? Either in terms of
there are
dollars.
tangible things we can talk about. You know, like I talked, to be able to start infrastructure projects sooner is really the big thing. We hold off on a lot of infrastructure work on the site, just not knowing what that budget is. So it would be difficult to quantify it, but we can certainly talk about what the impacts are.
Well, you know, I think that needs to be publicized, not only to us and the rest of the group, but also to the people that control the purse strings. Because it leads to my next point, is that it's basically a pay me now or pay me later. Either Angela has the money for D&D, or she puts it off to a later date. Well, if she puts it off to a later date, that's going to add cost.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be a dollar contribution. And therefore, can't we project a future cost versus current cost so that they understand what the impact of not putting that budget money there?
Yes, to be honest with you, we could do that. I mean, we could put together a white paper that talked about what the impacts are of not getting a budget, you know, first of the year. Another impact are hiring. You know, our contractors hold back on hiring because they don't know what the budget's going to be. Okay, but we still got people retiring. You can't stop somebody from retiring, but you know, they're hesitant to hire because they don't want to be in a situation when they got to lay off people if they don't get the budget. So there's a lot of decisions that are made across the site that are put on hold, not knowing what our future budget's going to be, or our fiscal year budget's going to be.
Sonny?
Yes, I wanted to be specific about that for a moment. We see that very clearly. Let's say Soulstone Disposal Unit construction. 1 year we may have only in the budget, because that's what we need, about $7 million. But we're supposed to ramp up the next year to $40 million to support a schedule that is the most efficient schedule and minimizes the cost based on what the vendor can do. And that next year we don't have a budget that has been approved in a timely manner. And we have a continuing resolution. That means that it falls back usually to the budget of the year before. So again, we would have to start that year $7 million instead of the 40. So that means that basically we probably have impacts to the vendor, the contract with that vendor, in terms of penalties, because they are not able to operate or build as the schedule says, and escalation, etc.
Here's a good example of that. Here's SDU 8 and 9. We're planning on $51 million next year. But if we're under a continuing resolution, we're only going to get $7.5 million.
Exactly.
So we're planning on spending $51 million, but we're only going to get $7.5 million. And if it's a 6-month CR, then now we're just going to trickle that work along. And then if I do get $51 million, the fiscal year's left, I can't make up all that time. So time is money.
Yes, and from the taxpayer standpoint, it works. It's also true the other way around. A project maybe was supposed to get $150 million that 1 year, and then the next is supposed to go down to $20 million. Now that project has another $150 million in their pocket, is tied up, not doing real work, and it just delays everything else. So,
Well, I think, my point is, all of us sitting here at the tables, we understand it, and we understand that you're planning on spending $51 million, but if you don't get the approval, you'll only get 7. But do the powers that be understand that in terms of what impact it has to the public's risk as well as out-of-pocket expense?
I'm assuming they know that. I mean, this happens, this isn't just EM, this is the whole federal government, primarily it's under a continuing resolution. So they have to know the impacts of not letting these programs know what their fiscal year budget is. Unfortunately, politics gets in the way of all that.
Thank you.
AK.
AK Hassan Cab. Mr. Lopez, you mentioned that for the first time in 22 years, you were able to start projects on time due to funding. And we know that last year and part of this year, we experienced a federal government shutdown. But we also learned as a part of that process that the president had signed certain budgetary items that enable certain departments to continue to operate. And I'd like to know if DOE SRS was a beneficiary of that earlier signing by the president, meaning it was not affected by the shutdown. And the other part is there any reason to believe that that will be his process in the future, which would likely enable us to start again on time with this upcoming budget?
I'll answer your second question first. I don't know. We'd like it to be that way in the future, but we don't know. And yes, we were a huge beneficiary of having that budget scheduled or passed early in the year. It was a tremendous benefit to the site. We were only secondarily impacted by work, like if we needed something from GSA for a lease, that was delayed a little bit. I know the president's budget was released a little bit later this year because OMB was shut down. But as far as operations at the site, we had really no impact from other agencies being shut down, but it was a great benefit to us.
Okay. Dave?
Dave Vabakas, Cab. I'll stick with James' two-question rule first. John, outstanding presentation as always. Thank you. When I look at the President's budget, the DOE request to Congress for FY20, and I look at PBS 42, I see that, PBS 41, I see that the 235F risk reduction for FY19, it's $8.4 million. And this isn't in your chart. This is just something I dug out. And then it goes down in FY20 to $4.6 million. Is there any explanation for that reduction?
It was probably because of the target that we received. Tough choices had to be made when we go through the budget process, and we prioritize our work scope. And so we made a decision as a site that we weren't able to do as much work in 20 as we did 19. It's strictly a budgetary reason.
Mike Michelinas, DOE. And Dave, I can give you a more precise answer to that. It was going down in 20 because the approach that was being done under the 2012-1 implementation plan in response to the board was wrapping up in 20. We would have finished de-inventorying the cells, would have been wrapping up the work in 20, so that's why it was going down. It's this year, and part of what you're going to be working on a recommendation that we're considering a change in course on that.
Thank you. And John, on your slide 3, you talked about the numbers being, this is for the FY20 President's budget. You talk about the numbers being finalized by OMB back around Thanksgiving time, and I guess unless you guys appeal, and then it may take a little bit longer. and that the budget, the president's budget finally gets over to Congress sometime in the February timeframe. So by the time the appropriation actually is, hopefully, if it's on time, it's by October 1st. What kind of, I mean, how stale does that request become over that period of time, and how do you guys keep Congress up to date and the staffers up to date with things that have changed at the site?
Well, it's very active. And like I said, a few weeks ago, we had a phone call with the House and Senate Energy Committees. That was here in April, where they had specific questions that they asked us about each program. And that was the time we were able to tell them, from the time that we submitted our budget back here or got our pass back in November, things have changed on site. Okay, and so I think I talked about, we told them, well, we're a little bit short in nuclear materials because we have some external funding sources that have gone away. So we could really use some help in PBS 11C. We didn't talk about it in 14C. We're a little bit short on operations dollars for SWPF. Because of the timing of when we submitted that budget and where we are today and what we know today, we know we need a little bit more money in 14C. So that process is very active. So they've submitted questions to us, we formally responded to them, and I anticipate in the June-July timeframe we're going to get more questions back from them as they talk to all the other sites, because they're going to have to balance out to a target. So we'll get more questions back from them and talking about what are the impacts. But when they do pass their spending bills this summer, their marks, okay, then they go through that reconciliation process. We as a site actually go through and say, okay, at the House, at this mark, this is the work we can and can't do. Senate, at your mark, this is the work we can and can't do. So it's very active between now and September on preparing the fiscal year 20 budget.
Thank you. Doug.
Doug Howard Cap. John, great presentation. I'm not a numbers guy, but I enjoy Gil over here crunching those numbers. My questions, I have 3 questions, and hopefully you can answer all 3 of them. How often do you all get audited?
Audited, you said?
Audited.
They're periodic, but there's all kinds of audits that take place. There's technical audits, there's cost audits. So are you talking costs, technical? But it's all over the board. It's not a consistent pattern. It's just, they happen periodically.
So the department, I guess, that you are in, you don't get audited, or?
No, we do have audits, but they're not on a regular basis.
It's Mike Budney at DOE. Actually, KPMG audits our financials every year. In addition to that, we must have a dozen or 15 GAO, IG things going on at any one time, all the time. So, and then headquarters comes down to help too.
And I take it you passed all of them, right?
Well, sometimes there's findings and sometimes they're not. We're pretty good on our cost audits, so.
Okay. The final question I have, hopefully you can answer it. How are contractors paid? Are they paid like a certain percentage before they start and then all of it after they get through, or?
No, they invoice as the work is completed. So they invoice each month. They'll submit an invoice for the work that was completed, but they're not paid ahead of time. So. And then they accrue fee throughout the year. Fee is not determined until the end of the year when our fee determining official signs the letter, says this is the fee that you've earned for the year. But they do provisional payments throughout the year. So, and I believe our M&O contractor, we're paying them like 90%. Okay, but if at the end of the year they only earn 70%, then we'll go back and they'll credit us for the amount that was overpaid.
And their monies are never held up because of the budget?
I'm sorry?
Their monies are never held up because of the budget?
The only time they've ever been held up is when we were in a lapse of appropriation, when we didn't get a budget. And we didn't have money to pay the invoices, so the contractors were working on their nickel at that time.
Thank you, John.
This is Thomas Johnson. One clarifying point.
On the fee, most of our contractors actually draw about 60% of the fee during the course of the year. And we do I said during the course of the year, during the course of the performance period. And then at the end of the period, that's when the fee determination official makes a decision and will finalize the amount of fee for that particular contractor.
Thank you.
Gil?
I knew I had to get a question from Gil.
I wait to the end. John, as always, I appreciate everything. Good news about the pension and what's going on with NNSA. I'm kind of confused though. On the CB&I portion, do we get a lump sum payment from CBI to take the people into the pension?
No, because a lot of those people were hired by SRS, but the pension plan's closed.
Right.
So, so there wouldn't be any lump sum.
Okay, yeah, I'm just kind of confused. So if the pension, so they were hired pre-2008?
Well, that was a separate subcontract, so they weren't using site labor. They brought in their own people to build the MOX facility, so they weren't using site labor to do that. So typically the SRS are people that have been there for many years. The MOX project was a brand new project where they brought in subcontract workers from the outside, so they were never part of the pension program.
So I guess I'm just missing the connection.
Very similar to SWPF. SWPF was a capital line item construction project, brought resources in from the outside, didn't use site labor.
So now that SRS is bringing more people online into their contract, they're paying more into the pension?
That's correct, because pension costs for our M&O are distributed among every customer that the M&O has, every charge number that's in the M&O. So now that they're doing all that MOX transition work, that all gets part of the M&O's overhead costs. So the overhead costs are fixed, but now we're spreading those overhead costs over more funding sources.
Okay, I think I follow you. It's good news, so thanks.
Dave, you had some more follow-ups?
A couple questions, John, if I could, please. On slide 6, you, I don't remember what you called it, the arbitrary ceiling that you set in FY21. So the discount rate is a driver for the pension contribution. Is it significantly above the discount rate, and for how long? And what happens if the discount rate should start to, rise? And
you're asking questions that are way over my head.
Okay.
What we did, Dave, is we went to our actuary and said, they gave us what the ERISA minimum payments were, and we went back to them and said, hey, if we wanted to do a flat funding profile, based on discount rates, expected return on the investment, what would that number be? And they came back and told us it's 296. So it's not an arbitrary number. It's something that the actuaries actually calculated for that flat funding payment.
Okay. And here's my real concern, is that in the President's budget, when I look at the request to Congress for FY20, it shows the pension contribution for SRS peaking in 2024. But if I look at FY20, and if I added these numbers correctly that were in the request is slightly more than 189 million. Your chart shows that that's about $49 million difference, less. So it seems to me that you've got to find $49 million somewhere on that budget chart that you have out of those PBSs, because now you're from what you submitted to Congress and what you are projecting now, there's a $49 million difference that you need to make up.
That's correct. So our buying power has gone down because we planned the fiscal year 20 budget was in fiscal year 18. All right. This chart reflects the January of 19 report, and so pension costs because of market returns have gone up. So you're right. We got to find more money in 20 than what we asked for. What's going to help offset that, though, is that when we planned the 20 budget, NNSA wasn't planning at this level. They were planning at the same levels they were for 19. Now, because of pit production, the MOX transition, tritium sustainment project, their spending for 20 is really going to start going up. So that's going to help offset that additional pension increase in 20.
I'll jump in with one last question. Is there anything that Strategic and Legacy Management Committee can do to help you in any of these PBSs where you see that there might be a problem?
I'm not sure there's anything you can do. I mean, we've communicated our issues to Congress. So as long as they take what we've told them and incorporate that into the budget, I think we're good. So, you know, I think the biggest thing you can do is keep advocating for the program.
Thank you.
So, just to follow up on Dave, I think that was a great question. I know we cannot ask the Department of Energy for a specific recommendation, but is there something that the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee could possibly explore that may lead into a recommendation? I guess this is a question for our DDFOs, to where we could put something on the work plan to where the Strategic and Legacy Management may be able to come up with a recommendation to support budgetary efforts with the Hill.
Any suggestions?
Mike McElance, DOE. The immediate thought, your integrated priority letter is one. That'll really help quite a bit. And we'll take an action to get with John after the meeting to explore whether there's any questions or topics that if the committee worked on it might lead to a recommendation that would address an issue we have.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more? That's it. Thanks, John. Okay, quickly before everybody takes off, if you are leaving today, go ahead and check out. If you want to leave your bags in here over lunch, that's certainly a possibility. You're welcome to do that. But make sure you go ahead and clear out. We did get done a little bit early, but let's go ahead and keep our time. So 1:15, if everybody can be back in their seats at 1:15. I'm giving you extra time, so I know we can do it today. 1:15.